think, will they be able to see my mouse?
Mm,
It's not that's like super important, but if they can, then I can use it.
I think
Right.
so, yeah, because it comes up when, or at least when I screen share, so they should be able to see it.
Yeah.
Might be really
Okay.
small, but yeah, it should be on
Yeah.
there.
It's not crucial. I wasn't planning for it, but I'm thinking there are things I can like point out in images.
Yeah. All right, I'm just gonna do, all right, our sound test here. Okay, going live. Hey folks, so if you're listening, we're just doing our test behind the scenes here. We'll be right with you. Looking pretty good. Just gonna do another sound test here. I'm just gonna adjust some of that. All right, and just a final sound check, guys.
Mhm.
Thanks for hanging out in our audience with our wood turtle, which I think is on the screen now. Okay. All right. Welcome, folks. Just gonna do a transition there. There. Hi. Welcome to our August Nature Talks. This one all about turtles. It's your first time here. We do these every Tuesday, the first Tuesday in each month, with a rotating theme. And this month it's turtles. I'm Becky Parker. I'm a coordinator at Nature Nova Scotia. And our volunteers are off today. They're both on vacations, which I'm pretty jealous about. But luckily, we have just behind my virtual screen here Thomas Baker, who is a graduate researcher at Dalhousie and has joined us to talk about, well, all things turtles for a bit, and then a bit also about his own research. So without wasting time, I'm going to move right over to Thomas. Hello, Thomas. You're on our screen now.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So I'm good to share my screen.
Yeah, you can go right into it. So if you folks have
Perfect.
any questions for Thomas or any comments, go ahead, stick them in the chat. If you're having any
Oh,
trouble with the timing, just let us know. We can slow down to let you catch up. Just do some screen adjustments here too. Make sure you can see. Great, looks good, Thomas. Take it
sweet.
away.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Thomas, and today I'm going to be presenting on the freshwater turtles of Nova Scotia. You could also just as easily describe these as the freshwater turtles of Mi'kma'ki or of the Maritimes or of the Acadian Forest. It's kind of the same little gang of turtles for any of those kind of regional descriptions. And also, I'm going to be focusing only on the freshwater turtles because we do have some sea turtles in our waters offshore, but I think that's a topic for another time. Um, the idea of this presentation is kind of like a brief crash course through these four species, what they look like, where you might find them, what kind of habitat they like, and then some of the kind of overarching concepts that kind of are common to the four species. So take it away by just introducing myself. I am, as Rebecca said, a graduate student studying wood turtles at Dalhousie, so one of these four species. I am from Halifax, and for my undergrad, I studied biology at Dal as well, looking at, no, actually not turtles, but some at-risk bird species. And I've just always been deeply passionate about biodiversity, whether it's globally or especially here in my local area where I've grown up, the Acadian Forest region. And to start off, I'd like to look at some of the kind of what I think are some of the unifying physiological or ecological or biological characteristics of these four species, or kind of turtles in general, but really these four species in this context, that if are really important to understand these four species. So the first thing is that they're very slow growing and very slow to mature. It takes quite a few years for many of these species to actually get to an age where they can start reproducing themselves. One thing I'm terrible at is numbers, so I always forget exact numbers, but for some of them it's around like 15 years of age sometimes. which obviously is a lot of years that they need to survive before they can even start contributing to the population. They're also, and this is something characteristic of really many turtle species, is that they exhibit what we call type 3 survivorship, which is a fancy kind of biological term that is kind of explained if you look to the graph on the upper right side. So type 3 would be that green curve, and essentially what it means is that when they're young, they experience a lot of mortality, or it's very hard for an individual turtle to survive. A lot of them die off very young, but then as they get older, they very quickly become like safe and secure and pretty unlikely to die. And this is important not only for understanding these turtles, but also for understanding the threats they face today, because a lot of human activities have increased the risk that adults face and have increased what we call the mortality of adults. And because these species aren't used to that, they're not adapted to it, it's been having large impacts on them, because they're totally used to dying when they're young, but when an adult dies, or when that rate of death increases just a smidgen, that can have big impacts on the population. Another of these three characteristics that I think are really important to know about, and maybe these next two are a little more intuitive than the first one, but is that they're endothermic, which you might have also heard described as like cold-blooded. Essentially, that means that whereas unlike us, like mammals and many birds, we can regulate our metabolisms, we can regulate our body temperature and be as active or as warm as we need to be. Well, we maintain a constant body temperature, but we can be as active as we want whenever we want. Turtles, being cold-blooded or endothermic, cannot do that. And this means that there's two things they have to do. One is when wintertime comes around, it is too cold for them to be active. And so in order to stay safe and secure, what all four of these species do is they retreat to water bodies, sometimes rivers, sometimes lakes, ponds, and they hunker down at the very bottom of the water bodies. You can kind of see in this little diagram down here, there's the snapping turtle underwater. That's where they like to hibernate. And it's interesting, one really kind of fun fact is that turtles are air-breathing animals. They need to breathe air. They don't have gills, but they can actually breathe very inefficiently through their cloaca, or essentially through their butt. It's not efficient enough to let them swim around. Like if they were swimming around, they'd need to come up to the surface to breathe. But when they're in that dormant, very low metabolic state, they're able to survive off that little tiny bit of oxygen that comes in. And then the other thing with them being cold-blooded is that when it is warmer and they want to get out on land and start moving around, they often need to bask in the sun to bring their body temperature up so they can be more active. So that endothermic nature really dictates a lot of their behavior. Another thing that dictates their behavior is the fact that they lay eggs. And obviously, I think most people here, or everyone knows that turtles lay eggs, but it is important to remember because that means that they need to find sandy or gravelly areas to lay these eggs. They can't just put them down anywhere. They need somewhere they can dig in and lay them. And that can also be a problem when we're talking about threats, because one place that humans have created that turtles might look at and say, hey, that looks like a great spot to lay, is the sides of dirt and gravel roads, which then brings them closer to collisions with vehicles, which is obviously not good for turtles. So those are kind of the three big things. Just to run over them again, kind of slow growing, slow maturing, cold-blooded or endothermic, and egg laying. But getting into the actual turtles themselves, I want to start with the two more common species and then jump into the two less common. The first of the two common species is the eastern painted turtle. And this is really, I like to think of this as the kind of generic pond turtle. Not that these guys aren't cool, they're cool little animals, but they kind of, if you just imagine a turtle sitting in a pond, this is kind of that turtle. They are a small size when it comes to turtles in Nova Scotia. Their max length around 19 centimeters. And they have a low profile, very smooth shell. They also, as the name suggests, are kind of painted. They have streaks of yellow on the head, which are kind of, here on this photo, they're almost like whitish, but they are generally yellow. Maybe the intensity might depend on region, I'm not entirely sure. But then they also have streaks of red kind of starting there at the neck and then going along the body, and also on the edges of the top of the shell. And just some turtle terminology, the top part of the shell is called the carapace, and the bottom part is the plastron. So when I say that there's streaks of red along the carapace, that would be these little bits of color. They are, so I'm kind of, for distributions, I'm kind of using Nova Scotia because we're right on the edge of the continent. It's very easy to say they're this far west and this far south. So from Nova Scotia, eastern painted turtles go all the way west to southeastern Quebec, and then you can find them as far south as Georgia. The thing is, though, at those margins where like the edge of the range, that's actually not the edge of painted turtles in general, because eastern painted turtles are only one subspecies of a larger species, which are just painted turtles in general. And so once you hit that southeastern Quebec border, then you're getting into midland painted turtles. When you're down at the south of the Georgia border, you're getting into southern painted turtles. And then to the west of midland painted turtles, there are very, very well named western painted turtles. The names are pretty self-intuitive, or pretty intuitive. And really, for the entire species, they have a very broad range that covers much of the continent, really only petering off around the southwestern kind of probably more arid parts of the continent, and then also as you go north into the areas where it's just too cold. Within Nova Scotia, these guys are very, they once were more common, but still quite common throughout the southwestern mainland. So kind of around the Halifax line, like where Halifax cuts across the peninsula, the province, and down from there. There is a bit coming up to the northeast of Halifax, but they do start to peter off in that area. And so these guys, when it comes to habitat, they really want shallow, slow-moving water, but really, if it's shallow and slow-moving, they're pretty okay with a lot of things. They want soft bottoms, they want lots of aquatic vegetation, and they love places to bask. Like you can see this turtle here on a log. These are really the turtles you'll see if you see a log or a rock in the middle of the water and there's a turtle or multiple turtles on it. They're often eastern painted turtles. But really, they'll enjoy swamps, marshes, ponds, creeks, rivers, and lakes. Just anything that's not too fast flowing, they're happy to be in it, as long as there is enough food, which there usually is. And when it comes to what they eat, another really good kind of rule of thumb with turtles is it seems that they just will eat, but they're very generalist. They'll eat whatever can fit in whatever they can get, and then whatever can fit in their mouth, as long as it's like tasty enough or energy dense enough. So when it comes to painted turtles, they'll eat both animal and plant material. They'll primarily in the water, so really just anything, aquatic invertebrates, aquatic vertebrates, aquatic plants, a lot of just anything that's in the water there. As well as they will feed on carrion too, which I feel like is something is a little bit unintuitive. You wouldn't think of a turtle going and feeding on carrion, but they're quite adaptable and generalist when it comes to what they eat. The second turtle, the other more common one we have here in the province, is the common snapping turtle. And we talk about key physical features. I think these ones are probably the ones people are most familiar with, because they're the ones you're most likely to see maybe crossing old like country roads and stuff. And they are big, commonly about 35 centimeters long, but they can reach up to 50 centimeters in length. And also, I guess I should say that when we talk about these measurements of length, we're actually only talking about the shell itself. So that wouldn't include in this photo, that wouldn't include its whole head and neck. That would only be from the front of the shell to the end. So a 50 centimeter turtle is actually going to look longer than 50 centimeters when its head is snapping out at you, because they do also have, as many people are probably aware, large muscular heads, large muscular jaws, which are something to keep in mind. In general, you shouldn't be harassing turtles and getting up in their space. But that's mostly for those turtles' sake. But when it comes to snapping turtles, it's also for your own sake, as those jaws can really do some damage to you, especially on your fingers. And also, compared to our other three species, the snapping turtle is quite a bit duller in coloration. They don't have any bright colors like the other three do. Even here on this one, I think that brown color you see underneath is just mud attached to its skin. Well, I'm not sure, but it's still not a bright color. They can sometimes have green growing on their shell, which is just algae growth or algal growth. And so these folks go as far west from Nova Scotia as far west as southern Saskatchewan, and then go down south throughout a lot of the United States, really all the way down in the southeast to Florida, and then down in the southwest all the way to northern New Mexico. So also quite, I mean, it's similar to the painted turtle as a species in terms of just like cross-continental range. In Nova Scotia, they can be found throughout the mainland, but almost similar to the painted turtle, they are more common in the southwest, and then certain isolated pockets in other parts of the mainland. These guys are also, this slide is actually quite a bit, I don't remember if I have any differences between this and the painted turtle, because they are also quite generalist, which I think explains why these two are the more common species. Really shallow, slow-moving water is good for them, with, once again, soft bottoms, lots of aquatic vegetation, but anything really, fens, bogs, swamps, marshes, ponds, lakes, rivers, as long with rivers, as long as it's not like a fast-flowing, very rapid like river. For foraging, it's similar to, I think people might be surprised that, at least, especially me too, I used to think that snapping turtles were only they just eat fish. They just eat fish, but they are omnivorous as well. So they will eat really anything that's underwater there. So any invertebrates, vertebrates, or plants, and then once again, carrion. So that ends our two common species. Our next one is quite a bit more uncommon, and it would be much, I would expect more people in the audience to have seen the first two turtles than to have seen this one, because this is the Blanding's turtle. These guys are kind of a medium size, and I mean that in relation to the other turtles in Nova Scotia. So they're kind of in an intermediate range between painted turtles and snapping turtles, with a max length of like 28 centimeters. They have a smooth shell like a painted turtle, but it's much more domed. It's not like the low profile of a painted turtle, and it almost looks kind of like, I'm not sure it's not really super as obvious in this photo because it's kind of part of the turtles underwater, but they kind of remind me of like a American like Second World War helmet. If you can think of like the very domed shape, they almost have that kind of look to them. And then they also, as you can see in this photo, have like little kind of yellow speckles on the shell. I have seen some other photos that suggest that maybe as they get older, or maybe between individuals, those speckles can be less visible. But on many turtles, you'll find they're quite speckly. And then there's quite a few key physical features for these guys. One of the most obvious one being the bright yellow that you can see on the underside of this guy's chin right here, but that continues along the underside of the body. And then also something you can see there is I'm sure it's just I don't know if it's just a coincidence, and we humans would pick up on it, but the way their jaws come together has this like little smile look to it, which you can kind of see in this photo. From the tip of the mouth to the kind of cheek position, it looks like they're always smiling, which obviously makes them look very cute. And then the last interesting physical feature is that, so I mentioned that the carapace is the top part of the shell and the plastron is the bottom. In most of the turtles, their plastrons are very simple. It's just bottom of a shell that you can imagine. But with Blanding's turtles, there's actually kind of a hinge between the two parts, between the kind of front middle part of the shell and the more rear part of the plastron. And this allows them to kind of pull up the back end of their plastron and kind of, it's almost like a little door closing, like kind of like those big military planes that have the doors in the back that open up like that, almost kind of like that, which is very cool. And these guys, distribution-wise, are quite different. So you can't describe them as a continuous distribution from here to anywhere else, because most of the Blanding's turtles in the world live in and around the Great Lakes. And then the ones here in Nova Scotia are actually entirely isolated from that main population. We only have Blanding's turtles in Kejimkujik National Park and in the kind of general vicinity around, but then they're totally isolated from turtles anywhere else. There are also, I think, isolated populations in New England as well, which is, it's interesting that we just have this little island almost of Blanding's turtles. These guys, when it comes to habitat, are a little more specialized in that they're a little less tolerant of flowing water. They're a little more interested in ponds and wetlands and places where the water is a little more still. They are really interested in organic substrates. Once again, aquatic vegetation is always great, and they need basking sites like the painted turtles. One interesting thing is that snapping turtles, compared to the other ones, don't seem to bask as much. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it has to do with the size of their body. They're able to or maybe they heat up. I'm not sure. I'm just speculating, but maybe they heat up slower in the sun. I'm not sure. But with Blanding's turtles, they like these fens, bogs, swamps, marshes, all sorts of wetlands, and then also ponds, very slow-moving creeks, and like the edges of lakes. And these guys are also different too, in that unlike the previous two species, these guys like meat. They do not like their veggies. They are primarily carnivorous and will eat anything from fish, frogs, frog eggs, carrion, to also your invertebrates like crayfish, insects or slugs, worms, snails, bivalves. I'm sure I imagine there's probably some flexibility there and they might eat some plant material, but they're more carnivorous than the other two species. And this finally brings us to our fourth and last native turtle here in Nova Scotia. And this is the turtle that's kind of near and dear to me because it's the one I'm working with, which is the wood turtle. These guys are small, similar size to painted turtles, I would say, like in that same kind of range, with also a low profile shell. But their shell is much rougher. It's kind of, you can kind of see it in this photo, that like kind of like the lines on the scales. I would describe it as more tortoise looking. And now tortoises aren't really a separate, like taxonomically when we're categorizing turtles, tortoises is just like kind of more of a common name that's given to terrestrial turtles. And while I would still describe a wood turtle, it's still a freshwater turtle. They are interestingly more terrestrial than any of the other ones. So it seems fitting that the most terrestrial of our species also has the most tortoise looking shell to it, and even kind of forelimbs and head. Also, the really big key feature that you can't miss is the bright orange coloration on their neck and their forelimbs. And I'll tell you, having seen these guys in the wild, that it is even more vibrant than anything you can see in photos. You see it and you're surprised by how bright that orange coloration is. And these guys go from Nova Scotia west all the way to southern Ontario and Minnesota, and then as far south as Virginia. Within Nova Scotia, they're actually one of the, maybe snapping turtles are the most distributed, but they're one of the more widely distributed turtles. We can find them throughout the province, except for, and this is interesting because it's kind of the inverse of the other turtles, except for the southwestern part of the province. Really, the only part of the southwest that they'll be in is the Annapolis River Valley, but all like the South Shore and Keji areas, seem to be entirely absent from. They also can be found on Cape Breton, which seems to be more unusual, and we don't really find even snapping turtles very commonly in Cape Breton compared to on the mainland. These guys, so this is actually a photo I took, and you can see the little wood turtle down in the bottom that we found. These guys are also interesting habitat-wise. They're the most, like I said, they're the most terrestrial, but they also are the most tolerant of flow and actually are specialized to living in rivers and streams. So you won't find these guys, unlike the other ones, you won't really find them in wetlands. You won't really find them in lakes or ponds. They are in rivers and streams, usually with like a moderate level of flow, as you can kind of see in this river. And also you can see that around this river is a lot of very flat kind of floodplain, because these guys like very meandering, bendy, windy, lazy rivers. As that sort of river creates the features we're assuming they like those rivers because they create some of the features that they like, which include deep pools in the bends that they use to overwinter in, and also around those bends, nice big sand and gravel bars that they can nest in. With the other three species, even into the summer, they'll probably still be, unless they're nesting, they'll still be hanging in and around the water. But wood turtles, once the summer gets warm enough, which is usually in Nova Scotia around the end of June, start of July, once it gets warm enough at night, especially, that's the important thing, these guys are into the woods, they're into the meadows, they're into the farmlands, and they have turned their back on the river, which is interesting and kind of lends itself to that kind of more tortoisey like lifestyle, at least during those couple months when it's warm. And when they're on land, they seem to use a diversity of habitats, like I said. So like mixed forests, alder swales, shrublands, meadows, farmlands. And they also seem to eat, once again, with all turtles, they seem to eat a lot of things, though their foraging is much more land-based. So they're going for slugs and worms, other invertebrates, but also like berries, mushrooms, flowers, anything that is tasty enough and that can fit in their mouth. and yes, they forage more terrestrially than other species. There are accounts of them foraging aquatically, so it probably does happen, but it's not as not as focused upon as it is for the other 3 species. So those are the 4 species. I also wanted to talk briefly about a species that isn't native. And so that is the red-eared slider. This guy is in the same subfamily as the eastern painted turtle, and you can kind of, looking at this photo, you might see the kind of family resemblance, that they look quite, especially from a distance, can look very closely similar to a painted turtle. Really, the big distinctive thing is that red ear on the side of their head, whereas the painted turtles just have yellow on their head. And so these guys are important to talk about because they are the most popular pet turtle. These are the turtles, if you were just going to a pet store and say, I want, which actually is illegal in Nova Scotia, from what I understand, you can't own turtles without a special permit. But say you were in a place where you could go into a pet store and just buy a turtle. Most likely, this is the kind of turtle you'd be walking in and purchasing. The problem is, it seems like a lot of people treat turtles as kind of novelty pets, where it's like it's cool for a couple months and then you get bored of it. And once people do this, they often think, oh, hey, I'll just put the turtle in a nearby pond. And as a result of this, these guys have made it onto the IUCN's list of 100 worst invasive species. They are originally from kind of the southeastern United States, but they've become invasive in Canada, Australia, Europe, Africa, Asia, I'm sure South America as well, just kind of across the entire country, across the entire world. Anywhere where people are having turtles as pets, these guys are ending up in the wild. And they can threaten native turtles both through competition for either whether it's food or for basking or nesting sites, but also especially, and this is maybe the more worrisome thing, can be the introduction of diseases and parasites, which often can be kind of incubated within breeding, like places where these are being bred and then brought in to environments where wild turtle populations are, which can then be susceptible to these foreign diseases and parasites. So if you get if you can get a turtle and you get a turtle and you decide you don't want it, please do not just put it out in the woods. And speaking of threats, this brings us to the unfortunate status of our 4 turtles. The eastern painted turtle and common snapping turtle, as you can see on this chart, are generally not really worried too much about. Federally, they are considered special concern, and provincially, the snapping turtle is considered vulnerable. This is less so because of their current populations and more because of those kind of things like slow growth and slow maturity and susceptibility to population loss when you have adult mortality. So it's kind of like they're seen as being at risk of being at risk. Whereas the Blandings turtles and wood turtles are definitely fully at risk. They are both considered endangered globally, and then within Canada, it varies. Well, wood turtles within Canada are threatened both federally and provincially within Nova Scotia, while Blandings turtles are federally looked at as 2 different things. There's the main Great Lakes St. Lawrence population, and there's the island Nova Scotia population. The Nova Scotia population is rightfully so considered endangered. And in Nova Scotia, we also consider them endangered, while the larger kind of Quebec, Ontario population is thought of as threatened. Though I think last time I checked, COSEWIC, which is the science kind of board that handles listing, they've recommended to Sarah, who is the kind of government final decision maker on status, that listing get bumped up to endangered, which would mean that Blandings turtles would be considered endangered across Canada. So hopefully we can turn around these trends for these 2 very, very cool little creatures. But if we can't, the reasons will be because of stuff like this. Big thing, like I said, is adult mortality. As these are species that would have, before industrial society, naturally did not die very often once they became adults. But now, as you can see on the right, there are things like trucks and cars and tractors and plows, and these things do not treat turtles very nicely when they hit into them. Roads are a problem for all 4 species, especially when females are moving on land to go nest. And especially that's also doubly bad because the females are the ones you really need. if you lose females, you very quickly lose the reproductive potential of a population. And then the farmland one is probably a problem to some degree for all turtles, but really is more of a problem for wood turtles, as they're the ones that are going to be venturing into meadows and farmlands looking for worms and flowers and stuff. And then they can get hit by plows. There's also the old common culprit, which is a problem with seemingly any at-risk species, which is just habitat modification and destruction. That includes urban, suburban, cottage development, as well as forestry practices. And this seems like it can be especially bad because turtles exhibit, I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe this with an adjective, but they exhibit site fidelity, where essentially the individual turtle really likes the spot where it goes to find food. They really like the spots where they nest. They really like their overwintering sites, and they'll often return year after year after year to those same spots, which suggests that if you alter those areas, you can probably throw them off quite a bit, because they'll still go. If say you build a subdivision where the turtle used to always go in and look for raspberries, if it's a wood turtle, that turtle will still go in thinking, oh, here's my little favorite raspberry patch that I'm going to go eat some raspberries. Or maybe there's like a sandy patch somewhere in the forest where they have to nest. But then they'll wander into a suburb, and then that puts them at risk of being hit by cars or attacked by dogs or picked up by people, or attacked by raccoons. So another unfortunate thing is subsidized predation, where raccoons are probably the biggest thing, but it really includes things from coyotes to foxes, to probably even rats, really, even when it comes to eggs, maybe. But really, a lot of our development, whether it's urban or suburban or rural, usually increases the population of small to medium-sized mammals, like especially like raccoons, which are, like, especially anyone who's lived in like Toronto would be able to attest to this, that these sorts of animals do really, really well in and around humans. And their populations are probably higher than they would be if those developments weren't there, if humans weren't living in cities or towns. The problem then for turtles is that these guys like to both eat turtle eggs and also eat adult turtles. I went to a river last summer that just had tons of predated nests, which is normal to some extent. The raccoons are a native species here, and that would be a normal part of kind of the interrelationships between species. But it's just when you have more raccoons than you would normally, and you already have fewer turtles than you would normally, that it becomes a little imbalanced. Also, speaking of humans, I'm not entirely sure if it's a really big problem here in Nova Scotia, but it has been recorded in parts of the States, especially for wood turtles, which I know more about. I'm sure similar things can happen with other turtle species, is that people will poach them, take them as live animals, and then sell them as pets, which potentially the turtle itself might live a happy life. Maybe he'll be fine in his little enclosure that someone gives him. But to his population or her population that they've been taken away from, it's essentially as if the turtle has been killed, because it can no longer contribute to the reproduction of its population. And then finally, I feel like you can't not write this, is climate change. Like, range shifts will probably be occurring as these turtles lose some of their southern range. But this is the sort of thing where people are currently studying this and trying to figure out how this will affect them. There's still a lot of unknowns. One thing is that for 3 of our turtle species, one sec, sorry, itching my throat. For 3 of these species, the blandings, painted, and snapping turtle, when they're still in their eggs, their sex is determined by the temperature that the egg is being incubated at. Now I'm blanking, of course. I think it's generally warmer temperatures favor the production of females, and generally colder favor males. I might be getting that mixed up, but it's a relationship generally like that for the 3 species, a little bit different for each species, but generally. So as temperatures on average warm, then you're going to probably see sex ratios coming imbalanced, where you have more of one sex than the other, which obviously can become a problem. For wood turtles, funnily enough, they have independently, I'm not sure if it's wood turtles or kind of like their little family, including like bog turtles and the other turtle that they're related to, they have independently evolved a genetic system for sex determination that's actually quite a lot like ours, with kind of an XY chromosome system. So I mean, maybe that means that they'll be more resilient to climate change. It's really hard to say, and there's probably going to be a lot of other problems with climate change that affect them. So that's sort of be doom and gloom, but there's a lot of turtles are threatened by quite a few things. So coming to my research, with wood turtles specifically in Nova Scotia, and actually before I jump on, I just want to mention that this guy here, right, if you look at the front of his nose, it's really bizarre, but it looks like the tip of his nose had been broken off, and that could have been something like a raccoon or coyote or something that had grabbed onto his nose. A lot of times you'll also see the ends of their tails are bitten off too. And then even I found turtles that are missing entire limbs, because often like a raccoon will come in and grab a limb and then bite it off. But that's an aside. For my project, in talking with the reptile and amphibian recovery team here in Nova Scotia and some other folks, it was identified that there are lots of rivers around Nova Scotia where we know there are wood turtle populations, and people have been looking at those populations for quite a while. There's also a lot of gray areas throughout the province where people haven't really looked in the past, so we don't know. And there are some examples of turtle populations that have just sort of been discovered randomly, like as flukes. And if someone's like, "Oh, I never knew there were wood turtles in this area," and suddenly there are. Because generally, if you're not looking for them, it can be hard to find them. So that gap was identified, and it was determined that doing some modeling work might be beneficial to help us scope down places where we could go look for turtles and try to expand our geographic understanding of where they are. So working with the relevant departments, both in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, as well as some groups like Nature Conservancy in Canada, MTRI, CARP, I began in the last kind of early this year working on species distribution models for this species within the two provinces. And those are essentially kind of predictive models that use both the data of where we found these turtles and then data of the environmental characteristics at certain points to build relationships and then to infer or predict where you might find turtles elsewhere. These preliminary models that I built in the start of this year were then used to direct some provincial staff in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick towards places to look for turtles. I was really happy that we were able to get people out like that. And then since then, I've been working on refining these models and kind of trying to improve them, hopefully to make them more effective, more accurate, and more useful. Here is an image of the model that I developed for Nova Scotia that I used for this preliminary kind of field targeting survey stuff. Essentially, this is a kind of machine learning based algorithm that looks at the environmental characteristics that I fed into it and then designates a score from 0 to 1 at each of the cells that are in this, which are, they're like 250 meter by 250 meter. And the way I've colored it right here is just saying from the bluer color is the lower predicted probabilities of occurrence. And then as you increase towards red, you get higher probabilities. Obviously, you can see that it's highlighting watersheds, it's highlighting rivers. But really, if this is just looking at this isn't really entirely explanatory, because if you were to zoom in on some of those red spots, you can see a lot of the granularity in that. It's not just all red. Like, I mean, that's just the way I've colored it in this diagram. But the number, you can really break down the individual areas within rivers or individual rivers with different scores. So it's really cool stuff to work with. It's not you can't trust it like it's gospel. You have to take it all. It's only as good as the work you put into it. So it's something you can keep on improving. But it is a nice tool to use to help kind of focus your efforts and help you prioritize places you might want to go. And hopefully, with finding more turtles, we can then better establish where they need to be protected and better establish things like I can't remember. I always get the two terms mixed up. But there's core habitat and critical habitat. One of those two terms. Hopefully, that can get that better established for the unknown or lesser known parts of the turtles range. Those are some of my references. Don't worry too much about reading all that. And questions. Here's a great little wood turtle that I found and took a photo of. But I love this photo.
Super cute photo. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, folks, if you have any questions, you can stick them in the chat there. I'll get us started off while you're thinking or typing there. Although I do see, maybe I could start with Ron's earlier question here. He had a comment about the terms warm or cold-blooded. He's saying the correct term for is ectotherm for cold-blooded, and is it endotherm for warm-blooded? Is that right, Thomas?
Yeah, and I only say warm-blooded and cold-blooded because more people might be familiar with those terms, but they can be a little misleading, and the proper terms would be ecto and endothermic. Ecto for I think I actually might have actually I might have written the wrong one down on my slide. They are ectothermic organisms, not endothermic.
Could you tell us a bit about the physiology of the two?
Sure, yeah. So one of the reasons why terms like ectothermic and endothermic are a little better is because than cold and warm-blooded is because cold-blooded kind of makes you think that the animal is always cold, which is not the case. It's less about the temperature of the animal and more about whether the animal can control its own metabolism and its own temperature by itself. So if you think of yourself, I'll get this right this time, endothermic, endo like interior, like within ourselves, we are able to constantly keep ourselves at a constant body temperature. What is it, like 37.5 or something? And we do that through, I'm not a human physiologist, but I assume we do that through hormones and processes that are able to kickstart our metabolism and keep it at a constant rate. And this is great because it allows us to, because our temperature is really just, our body temperature is just a function of our metabolism. The more stuff that's going on in your body, the more heat you're going to produce, because heat produces a byproduct of things happening in your body. So because we can control how things are happening in our body easier, we can just keep that heat constantly up, which means when it gets cold out, we can just, like, even in the middle of winter, any of us, we might not like it, but we can get up and go for a run. We might feel cold, but we can still physically do it. It's not like our bodies are shutting down. Ectothermic animals like turtles, in comparison or in contrast, so they're ecto like exterior. They are unable to control their own body temperature and metabolism. So it's interesting. With us, it's like we control our metabolism, and that sets our body temperature. With ectothermic animals like turtles, they have to control their body temperature somehow, and that will impact their metabolism. So a turtle, for example, if the temperature outside is cold, the turtle is going to get cold. It doesn't really have any way of keeping itself not cold. And then once it becomes cold, its metabolism will tank, and it will literally, if it gets too cold, physically not be able to move. And this is why those turtles like to get in water in the winter, because they're a little safer from predators. Because you can imagine if a wood turtle is sitting on land and it's winter and they can't move, and a raccoon comes up or a coyote, a turtle can literally do nothing. They are frozen solid, not frozen in terms of physically frozen, but they're unable to move their muscles because they are too cold, and they'd be very easy pickings for any animal that came along. And that's also why when they want to get started and want to get moving, they have to kind of drag themselves sluggishly over to a sunny spot and then sit in that sunny spot, soak in that warmth, which then kickstarts their kind of essentially their engine, like kickstarts their engine, gets their body kind of running, and then they can go off and do whatever they want to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good explanation. Thanks. I guess if we stick with physiology for a sec, I know I'm wondering about snapping turtles, and it's a little bit out of your research expertise. But snapping turtles are just so big and scary looking compared to other turtles. Is there some sort of relationship there between them being a generalist, or is it the environment, or why do snapping turtles just look so terrifying compared to other turtles?
That might be, I can speculate, but that's outside my exact knowledge. I don't know for sure. No, I can't. I can look into that, but I'm not entirely sure what, because it's an interesting question, because most turtles we have, even in North America, and really most turtles across the planet, are kind of that small, medium size, besides once you get into the ocean. So it is funny when you think of these types of turtles, like snapping turtles or like giant like giant kind of Galapagos tortoises, why do those ones in particular get so big? It could just be one of those evolutionary things where it just happened and they got by and they've survived to this point, so they're going to keep doing it. Not everything always has a nice explanation. Sometimes it happened that way and it worked. But snapping turtles, why would they want to get bigger?
Yeah. Well, if
I'm
you
not
think
sure.
of anything, let us know. Yeah, I'm wondering just where, where they occupy kind of different niche, whether they're a generalist or, if there's something there that has to relate to size. I do see a question in the chat here from Patty who's asking about another big turtle. She's wondering if we ever see leatherbacks in Nova Scotia.
We do actually. This is just a couple days ago. If you go on, there's probably a couple different Facebook pages you can go on to find this. But I think it was posted on the Turtle Patrol Facebook website. So if you go on search up Turtle Patrol, I think this came up last week. Maybe it feels like it was very recently that there was a leatherback turtle that got stranded in what's the river that flows through into Truro? That they have the tidal boring.
It was either the Shubenacadie or Stewiacke, I think. We shared it too, Patty. Yes. If you're not following us already, yeah, give us a follow.
Yeah. Did you folks also shared it?
Yeah, it was all over at least Facebook and Instagram for the week. Everybody was super excited about the turtle in the Bay of Fundy. But I wonder.
There's some. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh no, I was wondering where, because that's a very different turtle for sure. I mean, they're a sea turtle, but to get back to that size point, is there something about like where they live, just having like no boundaries kind of thing, or and how are they surviving up here when it's so cold? You would think for sea turtles. Turtles are tough.
Yeah, I honestly, sea turtles are not my expertise, but I would say that the size thing is fairly apparent in that they probably a turtle species that was too small would just have a very hard time getting through the water. Like there's kind of I feel like there's a kind of a size they need to be at to be effective at traveling across ocean, like distances in the ocean. I don't think like a painted turtle would do very well if you dropped it. I mean, assuming it could find
good experiment.
I don't think they'd swim across like the Caribbean very easily. They'd be like, so I feel like a certain size is beneficial for just locomotion even.
Okay.
But there's also big sharks and stuff in the water, so they probably don't want to be too small for that reason too.
Yeah, Patty, we'll post some information about leatherbacks. So there are some folks locally in Nova Scotia that do study them, and they are pretty fascinating. So we'll make sure that you get that via email or our social media. I have a question, Thomas, about selection in turtles, where turtles are a kind of species that mature so slowly, and they're a kind of species that has a strategy where they have a whole lot of babies at once, and then they aren't really taking care of them, and very few of those babies survive to adulthood. There's a name for that kind of selection, isn't there? Is that R selected? K selected?
Yeah, it's R and K. What is it? Because R means, I think it's R selected because R stands for the reproductive rate, and K stands for the population capacity, doesn't it?
Takes me back to undergrad.
They stand for something in the equations. I think R would be what you're talking about, because I think R means like it's the kind of the number you multiply by the current population to get what it would be at in the next generation. So an R selected species is one that tries to get that number high, kind of at the expense of anything else. Yeah. And then it also kind of feeds into what I was saying before about like type 3 survivorship kind of strategies, where they're essentially designed to die when they're young. Well, for most of the turtles to die when they're young, but then the ones that do make it, they make it, and they're solid. And those things kind of go hand in hand. They don't always need to. Some things, I guess you would. R selected species don't have to be type 3, but I think most type 3 species would be R selected, if that makes sense, because they just want to put out a bunch of babies and then kind of gamble that some of them are going to make it through.
Do you think, just from your experience within the conservation community, are we seeing declines in more species that have those sort of strategies where they take so long to mature versus species like maybe mice or deer that are really quick and yeah?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I think that's a global issue. It's definitely species like that are kind of set up to fail when it comes to dealing with humans, because so many of them are adapted to worlds where they don't, like I said, they don't get killed when they're adults. But then people do, then we come in and either we kill them intentionally or we kill them accidentally. And it does definitely, I think you can think of, even just locally, you can compare turtles to raccoons. So raccoons would be a species that I would say probably has a type 2 survivorship, which kind of means that they have constant survival rate their entire life, like kind of a moderate level of survival when they're young, but a moderate survival when they're old. And like I would say, I'm not advocating for this, but I would say you could go out and kill tons of raccoons all over Nova Scotia. You see them run over on the road. You run over tons and tons and tons of raccoons, and just because of the way their life history and reproductive strategies are set up, they can bounce back from that. Same with mice are like the perfect example too, or rats. But then species like turtles, they can't deal with that. Even though there are selected species, so they can pump out a lot of babies when they have babies, they can have a lot. It's the problem of how long it takes that baby to then get to the age where they can have their own. And also, I think it's pretty rare that a turtle will have offspring every year in sequence. It's usually, I think, like they have offspring 1 year and they take a break year and they have offspring again. So that makes it even harder for them to rebound. Yeah, no, it's really, I mean, I don't know if everyone, it's kind of getting into like the nerdy kind of theory of biology and ecology, but I've always found stuff like life history traits and how they impact both ecology and evolution and how that all kind of feeds in on itself very interesting.
Okay, super interesting. We have a couple questions here that are maybe a bit related to each other. Before we get to those, I can ask you about taking care of turtles, or what happens when you find a turtle on the road. So let's say people are going on vacation, they're heading down towards southwest Nova Scotia where there's a whole bunch of turtles, and you just find a turtle. What happens then? What should you be doing?
Yeah, so I'd say the most common situation someone will see a turtle in is on the road. And I know sometimes it's people's intuition that they should take it and bring it back to the close side that it's on, but turtles are stubborn animals and they know where they want to go. So if you find a turtle on the side of the road, and even if it's just starting to cross, if you want to help it, you should bring it to the side it wants to go to. Because if you bring it back the way it came, it's just, once you leave, it's just going to haul itself back on and go back the same way. They are stubborn little animals that don't care where you put them. They're going somewhere. So yeah, if you would like to help a turtle you see by the road, which I think is a great thing to do, because the road is a very, very dangerous place for a turtle. That would be to pick it up and bring it to the other side. When we're talking about painted landings and wood, there's really no threat to you besides they may carry salmonella, so I'd probably wash my hands after handling them, sanitize your hands, and also maybe for the turtle's sake, try not to have. It's the same thing with like frogs and stuff. Not exactly the same because frogs are more sensitive, but just animals in general, you don't want to have a bunch of gunk on your hands, like synthetic gunk that they might not like. So if you can, kind of clean your hands off first and then clean your hands off afterwards for your own sake. And then also when you're carrying them, it's just really about being gentle. Turtles they seem like little tanks and they kind of can sometimes be, but they can also be fairly delicate. So you really want to keep them, if you're just moving them, you want to keep them level the whole time. Don't like spin them and flip them around very quickly. Their organs can kind of get jumbled up pretty easily. So just take them over very gently to the other side and then lay them down gently. And to be extra careful, maybe just hold them close to the ground. So if anything happens and they do fall, it's not going to be as far as like holding them high off the ground. When it comes to snapping turtles, though, it's a little trickier, and I wouldn't judge anyone for not wanting to help a snapping turtle across the road, because they are dangerous. They can hurt you, and also their necks can go back further than you think. So I'd advise against trying to pick up a snapping turtle. They're big and heavy. But if you can, I've seen people like goad them into biting a stick and then using that stick to like kind of pull them along. I mean, it's probably not the most comfortable thing for the turtle, but if it beats being hit by a car, I've also seen you can maybe kind of push them with a stick too, but it's definitely harder. It's more difficult than helping one of the small turtles. And then the other thing I would say, sorry, I feel like I talk too much these answers, but one other thing would be if you find a turtle just in the woods, like if you're just going for a walk and you find a turtle in the woods, like don't panic. The turtle is there because it wants to be there. Just let it be. It's even if it's like really far away from a pond or a river or something, it's there because it wants to be there. They're not, I mean, they're not like super smart animals, but they're not super dumb animals either. They have an idea, they have a very good memory of the place of like their area, and they probably have a place in mind they're headed towards. So they'll be very, probably, I don't know if they'll really understand what's going on, but they'll probably, if they could, they'd be very upset if you like picked them up and brought them to a pond because they're like, no, I want to go over there. That's what I'd say probably for interacting with turtles. And then also, if you don't need to interact with it, don't interact with it. You can look at it from a distance, but don't harass them for no reason.
Right. Yeah. So if they're not in like immediate danger, then they're probably doing all right without you. So you don't need to get involved. Yeah. And if you do, make sure we should make a note, I guess. Make sure you're pulled over safely on the side of the road. You're not in any danger yourself, and all that. What about a turtle that is maybe dead? Probably a lot of our followers are already familiar enough with groups like Hope for Wildlife and other animal rehab spots where you could bring an injured turtle. Are you aware of any initiatives locally to save eggs?
There are local groups involved in stuff like that. Like in Keji, I know Parks Canada does some stuff, and they're also with like Mersey Tobatic Research Institute in that kind of southwest area. In the Annapolis Valley, probably the Clean Annapolis River Project. I'm sure up in Cape Breton or Unama'ki Institute for Natural Resources, I think does some stuff with turtles. And then maybe like St. Mary's River Association and the same. Like there's lots of local organizations that might be involved in that sort of thing. So if you are interested in turtles, whether it's with eggs or if you find them, I would try to reach out to your local kind of NGOs and see what they would say. Also, if you were to find a dead turtle on the side of the road, it is not bad practice to document it in some way, because the more data we have on places where turtles are killed, or even just animals in general, roadkill in general is really important to document, because the more records we have of animals being killed at a spot, the more evidence there is to say that maybe like something should be put in here, whether it's like an underpass or a culvert or something, because maybe this is a kind of a roadkill hotspot. So whether that's, I don't know if people know like iNaturalist, if you can like just post, like even if it's a dead animal, posting a photo of a dead animal. I'm not sure if there's some way on iNaturalist of like flagging it as a roadkill. It'd be cool if there was. I'm not sure if there is. But that stuff, that can be really useful information.
Yeah. All right. So we've got two kind of threads there, I guess. We've got your data availability. So if you've spotted a turtle, dead or alive, great to report. And iNaturalist is a really great spot to do that. Probably a lot of our audience are already familiar with iNaturalist. But I know in Ontario, there is egg rehab going on, where if you get a female, even a deceased female, in quick enough, some of those eggs can be salvaged and hatched in center. I'm not aware of anyone doing that locally, but we can find out and put that in our socials and email follow up afterwards.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. That would be the same thing I'd ask around like local organizations, and see what they're doing with that. I don't know. I think there have been some. I feel like there have been Blanding's turtle work that's been done. Not I don't know about rescuing eggs, but like with kind of kickstart, like head starting programs where they raise turtles and then release them. But I honestly I don't know for sure.
We'll let you folks know. Ron's just saying in the chat there, Ron is our resident herp guy on the Nature Nova Scotia boards. He's saying that there's a roadkill project for the Maritimes. So on iNaturalist, if you are interested in posting those dead turtle pics, and it's a little bit morbid but important, there is a project for that. So yeah, definitely important to get that data out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't want to take us too late, so I'll muscle through some of our other questions here. Switching gears a little bit into, I guess, problem turtles or potentially problem turtles. Emily's wondering about management for the red-eared slider. She's asking, what, in your opinion, is the best way to combat invasive species like the red-eared slider when it comes to turtles?
Sure. I'm not entirely sure how large an issue it is, yes, in Nova Scotia. I know that there are places where you can find them. I think I saw one at Frog Pond a couple weeks or a couple months ago. I think there are some in there. Well, I know Nova Scotia has legislation that essentially bars people from owning pet turtles, which is it seems a little bit draconian, but I think also probably is effective for just making sure that doesn't happen. I don't know. I'm still torn on that because it seems a bit like overly strict. I think you can get permits though, so maybe there is some way. I don't know what that process is like, how if it's strict or if it's lenient, or whether I would have criticisms of it or commendations for it. But generally, I guess like stemming the tide of new pet turtles is a good way to prevent it from happening, because that's the only place they're going to come from. I don't think they're going to come from. They're not like a stowaway animal. They're not going to be like on a container ship and end up somewhere. It's going to be from a pet that's been released.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. In terms of like dealing with ones that are currently out there, I've even been in discussions with folks in government where they've talked about that, and I think it's still something that's, like I said, I don't know if it's a big. And actually, I mean that's even something to talk about. Is invasive species in Nova Scotia has for a while not really been on people's radar really specifically. And I think that's starting to change now. So maybe we'll see more targeted stuff. But then even on that kind of front, I'd say there's invasive species in Nova Scotia that I'd be a lot more worried about than red-eared sliders. There's something to consider, but I'm a lot more afraid of like hemlock woolly delicate than I am red-eared sliders at this moment. So
that's a good point.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, Emily, I'm not really sure if anyone in Nova Scotia is researching the impact of red-eared sliders on freshwater environments that they are released into. I know that it's a bigger problem in Ontario where there's just more release, but I'm not sure if red-eared sliders are a problem in Ontario because there's so much release, or because there's some sort of ecological process that number is interrupting, or if they're actually reproducing in the wild to an extent that they're creating problems. So that's a really interesting question. Maybe we can look into that some more and get back to you on red-eared sliders. Maybe a potential area for research in the future in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I'm like the climate thing's a question too. Is I don't even know if they'd really be able to sustain themselves in Nova Scotia yet, but that could change as things get warmer. Sorry, I don't totally know.
Oh, good questions though, folks. Once I get through everything here, I got a couple more questions about your own research, Thomas, before we go. I just want to make sure that I've got through our chat here. Well, Sarah is wondering, maybe before we switch gears into your research, Sarah is wondering about ways that average people can contribute to turtle conservation or conservation of their habitat. So this could be your own research, or for turtles in general, apart from the physical picking up the turtle and moving them across the road. How does the average citizen help turtles?
Yeah, so I think it's probably a bunch of different things, kind of like a mix. I think in order to protect turtles in Nova Scotia, we need to do a lot of things. Whether it's like that includes a mix of protected areas, off protected area management legislation, but then also just like private stewardship, I think is really an important part of it too. So I guess on one side, advocating to government that you care about just even more generally protecting wild space in Nova Scotia, but then also protecting at-risk species and having strong plans for at-risk species and how we protect them. And then also when it comes to and then I mean, that could also lead into like if you want to like donate to local like Conservancy of Canada or Nature Trust, that sort of thing. Because I know at least Nature Conservancy of Canada is interested in wood turtles among the many species they're interested in. But when it comes to kind of private stewardship, there's a lot of things, especially if you're like a rural landowner. There's a lot of things you can. I feel like every time I think about this, I'm thinking through the lens of wood turtles because that's what I focus on more. So I might lean on that more. But for wood turtles, for example, there's a lot you can do with, especially if you have fields that you cut or you plow. You can do a lot with. I'm going to blank on exact recommendations, but I can try to find good things that describe best practices. But there's a lot of things around even just like raising the blades of your mowers, or using different kinds of mowers, or actually the most effective thing is just not mowing during certain parts of the summer. Because the turtles are usually in the fields at a certain time, more so than other times. Also, we're just being conscientious when you're on back roads to keep an eye out for turtles, that you don't run over them. Of course, keep your own safety is paramount, but if you can protect yourself in protecting turtles, that's great. You can get involved with local organizations and help out if they have. I think there are quite a few things where you can go and volunteer and help out with stuff like that. If you own, like, even just things like if you own a cottage on a lake that has some marsh or some wetland by it, just being. And I feel like the problem is, I think everyone who's watching this talk is already going to do this sort of thing, but just not totally destroying that valuable habitat that turtles could be using, or be conscientious of what if they might be a place with like some sandy area that they might be nesting in, and not and like ATVs, like don't drive ATVs around, especially beaches that might have turtles in that area, because that can also be I didn't mention ATVs, but that kind of falls into that whole vehicles. I don't know, sorry, that's kind of a grab bag of things. I feel like I don't have like a silver bullet answer, but
that's all right. We have a lot of turtles, and there are a lot of threats to turtles, so a lot of things to do to steward turtles, I suppose. And one thing that we're trying to do more of here at Nature Nova Scotia, if you're interested, Sarah, is getting involved with policy, at the citizen level. So, we were definitely disappointed to see the Biodiversity Act didn't have the teeth that we wanted it to. I mean, there's going to be more environmental policy coming up in the future, so definitely pay attention to what's going on, at your municipal government and the provincial government levels, that can affect biodiversity in general. Would be one way to help for sure. We're lucky in Nova Scotia to have wetland policy, so that's one thing that can benefit turtles for sure. But there's loopholes to even that legislation. We still lose wetlands in some places. So it's a good question and a tricky one to answer, I think. Thomas, just before we go, and we're a couple minutes over here, I don't want to keep people, but I do want to ask you about. Okay, good. I did want to ask you about the figure you put up, your map. Why you had so little predicted or probability of occurrence in the Tobeatic-Keji area for wood turtles.
Yeah, and that's something it's really, I feel like I don't have the answer for that, because it's something I've talked to tons of people who work with wood turtles, and no one knows for sure why. We have ideas, and some ideas might be that kind of the idea that I feel like makes sense is that a lot of Nova Scotia is very river dominated. There's a lot of large rivers that have relatively few large lakes on them. But then that changes entirely when you get into southwestern Nova Scotia, and you have very few like large uninterrupted areas of river. You have a lot more of these large lakes. So in that sense, it's just generally there's not as much of that kind of meandering, windy, bendy, uninterrupted river habitat that wood turtles like. There's also differences in geology, which I think it's actually the underlying reason why you have that difference. So I think there's, make sure I don't get this mixed up, but the stone is generally harder, I believe. And now I'm gonna mess this up. But the stone is generally harder in southwestern Nova Scotia, which I think is probably why you see more lakes, because it's harder for water hasn't eroded through and cut passages as easily. But then it also might just lead into less of where you do have rivers. You don't have like the deep, you don't have those rivers that really cut into and created their nice bendy, windy areas with nice floodplain, low floodplain around them. Because that is something I didn't really mention. Wood turtles, they're not against going uphill, but they generally will like more lowland floodplain area around. They will walk up hills, but kind of the more floodplain area you have, the better. So that kind of difference in geology and river versus lake dominated landscapes, I think might be the reason why you see that difference, and also maybe is the reason why you see the difference with the other turtles too. It's hard to say. No one seems to really have like a definitive answer for it. But I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. It seems like because Southwest Nova Scotia is so known for its turtles, and I wonder if
Mm,
that's partly, at least for maybe other species of turtles, and that might be partly because it's those other species that we're seeing down there, and maybe less so wood turtles, which
yeah,
maybe we're seeing more in agricultural areas.
yeah,
Um, or maybe it's also a function of that, yeah, that difference in geography between, say, like the Mersey River, which is turtle haven, and then like interior Tobiatic, which is lakes and rocks. So neat.
yeah,
Just
yeah. And oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Well, it just further points out how unique and how different the wood turtle is to other species. Like its habitat requirements are quite different. Um, yeah, not that the other three species are entirely the same, but they are more. They do form more of a kind of similar habitat. They like similar habitat more than the wood turtle. The wood turtle is definitely more disparate in that sense.
Yeah, well, they're an interesting turtle for sure. Those differences.
They are.
Before we go, what's really needed to sustain the wood turtle population or maybe improve the wood turtle population into the future? So, how many breeding pairs or what's, the population number that we're aiming
Mm,
for? What are the benchmarks that we've got to reach in the near future for you to feel comfortable about wood turtles?
I'm not sure. You're asking me numbers, and I forget everything. And actually, I mean, even when it comes to numbers, we don't even have like really good estimates of the total population of turtles in the province.
Maybe that's where we
Um,
start, I guess.
yeah, I think there is work being done now in the province to try to get better ideas of that, at least on the ones that, well, the populations we know. And then my work is kind of more the other side of it. It's like we're trying to find populations we don't know about. Um, probably dig into like recovery strategy stuff, and there's probably some. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but um, it can be really bad with turtles because it's like I'm trying to remember one study I read that was saying it's like 1%. If you lose 1% of the adults per year, and don't quote me on that because I might be wrong, but it was like a substantially small percentage of a population. If you lose that in wood turtles, and probably this is similar for other species, every year the population will decline towards extinction. Um, like it's a remarkably small amount of turtles. So on a small population, if it's a very small, like I guess 1%, if there's 100 turtles in the population, if you lose one turtle a year to a car, that population, if nothing happens, will trend towards disappearing. So it's really about trying to stop turtles from getting killed, uh, which I guess makes sense. But it's even more so than other species. Like species that can bounce back more, you might be more focused on kind of habitat integrity. But with turtles, it seems to be more like habitat integrity, of course, is important, but it's also just need to make sure they don't get killed, because it just every turtle death is honestly a tragedy to the population.
A lot of work to do. Well, finally, Thomas, so if folks are, because we have a lot of turtle people in our community, if they're hoping to share some information about maybe a wood turtle population that they've noticed in
Hmm.
their own backyard, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can. Can I bring my slide up for a
Yeah.
sec? I do have my email address on there. It might be easy for people to jot it down that way. Um, it might be easier than me saying it. So at the bottom, if you can see that, that's my email address, and you can definitely. I'd be happy if you find wood turtles, even if they're like, don't worry, maybe even if they're ones where a place where we already know they are, just send them to me. I'd be happy to see them, and I can send them on their way to whoever. Make sure those get sent into the parental database.
Great. I'll
Because
stick
yeah, no,
that in our chat here too.
I'd be happy to hear all about turtles. Um, that is something also to we mentioned iNaturalist, and I'm not sure if it does this automatically, but there are locational concerns with. I'm assuming landing turtle as well, but definitely for wood turtles. Where if you go on iNaturalist, for example, if you type in wood turtle, there are sightings in Nova Scotia, but you'll never be able to find a point. And I've never put in one in iNaturalist myself, so I don't know if it does that automatically. But it is good practice just for anyone who's doing that. If you find a live wood turtle and you want to record it on iNaturalist, which is no problem with doing, don't add in the exact location because I mean, it's a little, maybe it's overkill, but we want to make sure no one's using that as a way to go and find turtles and then poach them.
For some listed species, I know iNaturalist has a feature where if you put in a location for a listed species, it'll automatically blur that location. But that might only be for federal listings. I'm not sure. I have to look that up. But yeah, anyway, iNaturalist is a great tool.
Yeah,
Another
yeah,
other. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying it might do that automatically. I'm not sure, but in case it doesn't.
Yeah, no, good tips for sure, because poaching is definitely a real problem, so we don't want to be sharing locations.
Yeah.
Another group we should mention here would be the Turtle Patrol. So if you're not already following them, at least on Facebook, then give them a follow. We'll make sure that their stuff gets a link here too. Or almost 15 over, folks, so I will let you go. But thank you so much for being with us, Thomas. This was great. I don't know anything about turtles. I feel like I learned a lot tonight, so this was
You're welcome.
fantastic
No,
for
thank you
me.
for having me.
All right. So we're going to be back in exactly a month, folks. So the first Tuesday of next month, which is September. We're going to be switching gears a bit and moving into some more fall themes. So I think that next month is supposed to be about maybe foraging, harvests, hunting, and sustainability in nature, but we haven't got that nailed down yet. But it will be great either way, so tune in. We'll send out an email a little bit beforehand, and as always, if you've missed any of the presentations, they're all on YouTube, so you can go in tonight and watch any that you missed, or go in later and find any of those presentations you were hoping to watch. We'll leave it there for tonight. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in a month's time. Bye, folks.
Everyone, thanks.